I have a quick question on the physics of an event observed. So does this mean that if a man does something wrong in a forest and there's not a woman there to observe him, he's still wrong?
Yes.
Right.
What happens in the physics, just to clarify, and I'm not a physician. Is that right? Physician? Physicist. I'm not a physician either, by the way. But they've done experiments where they've shot particles across a room, and they've measured it some way without people looking at it, and then they've got an audience in to watch that happen, and the particles, without it being touched or anything, is different. So there's something intrinsic within physics which says that if an event is observed, it differs the event, which is just really interesting. And I think theatre people have known that forever. You know, there's a difference between what happens in a rehearsal room, where it could be a really good performance but no one's there to watch it, and what happens in a theatre. There's a different energy about it, different decisions are made, different things happen. So actually, when, as a director, you're watching the event, or you're even in ensemble theatre, you're participating in that event, you can go, well, that went really well, but actually you need to take into effect what happens when an audience is watching it. And that's not always controllable, but it's a very interesting dynamic. So.
Ned, when you were saying about an actor reacting honestly during a performance, what does that look like? Do you mean they'll ad lib, or what will they do? Give me an example of what kind of things they'll do honestly.
So the question is, when an actor is ad libbing, are they acting honestly? Was that?
No, Ned said that these directors are training their actors to react honestly like they would in real life, and I'm just wondering what that actually would look like. Does that mean that they change the lines of the script, or does it?
Yeah, it's about subtle things. It can be as dramatic as that, but it's to stop things like you know, when things go monumentally wrong on stage. I don't know if you've ever seen it, and some actors just kind of go, okay, we're just going to have to go back a bit. That's the worst thing that can happen in theatre. The absolute worst thing, that someone goes, I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to go back in the script, or for them to kind of go line. Because it just means that they're not inhabiting the role, they're not inhabiting the character. And so the character kind of almost takes on a life of its own, that the actor is so inhabiting that role that no matter what happens, no matter what comes on, they will respond. So their facial expressions, their emotional response to that, so therefore that affects the tone of their voice, the pace of their voice, all those decisions, even like small movements, they would respond, and all of those things would be in tune with that moment. Rather than having a set thing that you kind of go on and you go, right, and at this line I'm going to raise my hand to my face, and all of those mechanical things, people kind of sense that they're rehearsed, they're not real, they're not of that moment, that actually if anything goes wrong, that person's just going to carry on doing like a rope, like an automaton. I've just learned how to walk on and do my bit. Also, you know, there is a sort of sense of control. That's what the drama's there for. So the script is there to set the ball rolling, to give you the character and how it would respond, but also the narrative. So there's that intended future in drama, i.e. you've kind of got an idea of where you want to go. That drives the character. So when you're writing a script, you need to know that the reactions of the character are going to end up with that intended future, making that intended outcome actual. Because if you don't, people will see the jolts. They kind of go, well, if they did all those singular events, they wouldn't get to that outcome. So there's a sense of you need to make sure in the drama beforehand that it's all set up so that your intended outcome becomes actual. But actually there have been times in rehearsals when you've gone through it and actually actors have just got to a moment and go, the script says I should be leaving, but I can't leave, because in the moment I just don't feel like my character is going to leave. So you either work on changing the character and their response and kind of getting to know the character a bit more, or you change the script and you say, well, then the character doesn't leave. So you've got those two options. That's what the rehearsal period's for. It's about trying those moments out and getting the character to that moment and saying, actually, guys, do you know what? This character wouldn't do what the script says it would do. So you either go back and you change the character, or you reimagine the character, or you re-envisage the character, or you change the story. Does that make sense?
I'm fascinated by what you say, following on from that last question. Can you imagine a situation, or have you experienced it, where, for example, in worship, the reader of the scriptures, or the gospel for the day, is so imbued with the message that they are able to, rather than read it out, which we do every Sunday, set it aside and, as it were, live the character and speak even in new words? How far could we go down that road?
I think I would be very suspicious about changing the words. As I said before, in the theatre, writers get very sensitive about words, and quite rightly. They've written these words, and there's a reason for that. The job of the director and the actor is to understand how this story works, and how these characters work. The script is there to enable the actor to understand the character and to understand the story. And so in terms of scripture and reading scripture, the scripture is there to enable us to know the character and to know the story. And if we change the words of scripture, we are changing the story without actually considering what that does for everyone else in the room and for the other characters that are involved. I have seen when people have read scripture, and I've participated in moments where, so take for example at Christmas, I did a carol service and I learnt the prologue to John. Some of you might have seen it. And what happened was I did a lot of study. I read loads of different translations. I went back to the Greek and did all of that research. And kind of really, I felt like I really understood it. I really understood what the story of John, the story that he was setting out, and the character that he was writing in, the character of John the Baptist that he includes, but also the character of Christ, if I can even begin to capture something of that character. And so what happened was I got the words in my head, but there were some words which I knew that I could go off script, because I knew that John would. And I knew that John, as a writer, had established that in one word in the Greek, which none of us, well, some of us do and don't show off, but some of us know the Greek, but a lot of us don't know the Greek. But actually, that was all trying to communicate that one thing. So it was about, a lot of those words were just kind of my understanding of that word, so I just explored that concept in my head. I wasn't changing the words of Scripture, I was kind of just explaining it. So I guess, in some respects, that might in some way answer it, but it's not really changing the story or changing the thing. We're going to have to move on.
But right? Just to comment on that, would you agree that we perhaps underuse the ability to read Scripture dramatically in church?
Yes.
Good. Right, we'll move on.